Okay, so yeah, as I said, this one will be a little less difficult to understand. So this is the story of a startup which Stéphane Mallat created with 3 of its students, including myself, in 2001. It is a fairly typical startup for a company which is out of academic research. I will explain why. And I will also say a few words of the 2 startups I did after this one, which were a bit wiser and a bit more boring. Okay. So at the origin, there was Erwan Le Pennec's PhD on bandlets. So this is 2000. At this time, the rage was, in the name of sparse representation, to be able to use all the geometrical redundancy that you could find in images. So Candace and Dono were working on ridgelets and curvelets, and then Stéphane was working with Le Pennec on bandlets. And Erwan was starting to get interesting results, and we thought that maybe this was an opportunity to get a strong increase in performance for compression algorithm, which were badly needed at this time for both still images and videos, and on inverse problems. And so we had a very nice storytelling because it was very easy to explain that to investors, whoever. All we had to do is to remind the trajectory of signal processing from the Fourier transform in the 1980s, JPEG, the wavelets, on which were originating to a large extent from Stéphane, so there was credibility in there. Which was behind JPEG 2000, and then came bandlets, which were suddenly exploiting all the regularity which you can see around you on edges. Okay, so we were 4 applied mathematicians with 0 business experience, but the storytelling was nice. Okay. All right. So when you start a company like that, well, you don't get VC funding immediately. At least at this time. At this time, the investors needed a good reason to invest. So the most common way to fund your company at the beginning is to sell your expertise by doing consulting services, contract services, typically for industry customers. And the advantage of being a renowned scientist, and this will apply to most of you, is that it opens doors relatively easily. Okay, you're being taken seriously when you visit industrial and you offer to work on some of their problems. So this applies to many industries: satellite imaging, defense, medical, and seismic. I'll say a few on seismic because it's a special case. And yeah, while we're discussing satellite images, I must say that the name Let It Wave is actually credited to Frédéric Falzon, which had the idea, which had the idea on, I think, working on the beach with Stéphane. We were discussing the project, so credit where credit is due. Okay, so this is a very common way to start a company. And well, we were submitted a number of problems. Majority of them were different sorts of inverse problems, deblurring, super resolution, noise removal, the combination of all of them, combined also with compression algorithm. We are optimizing full workflows, sometimes on still images, sometimes on video. I'll just show you a brief example. And on video, of course, our storytelling worked very well also on videos because we were following the geometric structure across time, which would allow us to exploit all kinds of redundancies in our processing methods. Okay, this is a video projector, so yeah, well, unfortunately there are lots of videos here which you won't see much, but this was an example with General Electric. Here we wanted to, this is heart surgery where the surgeon is putting a stent, and here the goal was not so much to improve the image, but to reduce the X-ray dose that the patient was receiving during the operation. So we had to find a way to reduce the noise, and as I said, we were detecting the geometry, we were following across time, and thresholding the whole transform basically, and the transform was interpolated across the direction of regularities. This was working quite well. All this was before machine learning, and again, if you're curious, you should see at the screen here because you don't see much on the video projector. And of course, this had to be causal, something which we realized at the middle of the study, because if it's not causal, there is a latency. And this is a surgeon which is operating a heart, so you don't want a latency because of image processing. Okay. There are examples. I'm just showing a couple of examples in security and defense. So this is okay. There's no update of the. There's supposed to be a new image here. Yeah, it's still now. Yeah, but it's supposed to move to another slide. No?
No, voilà.
Okay, yeah, well, I will avoid image. So this was, okay, you don't really see that. So this is the night vision with a very large amount of noise, typical augmented night vision. And, well, if you could see it here, you could see that it is impossible to see the trees moving. So there's a latency. I'm not doing anything. The image is changing myself. Super interpolation. Anyway, so you could see the motion after processing, which you could not see before processing. So, of course, in defense and security application, being able to see objects move had an interest, obviously. Okay, so now you're supposed to see seismic images. Mm-hmm. Is there someone there? Okay, there you go. Okay. Okay, so that one was a nice surprise. We were contacted. We didn't think at all about seismic application when we started the project, but Stéphane and I had a publication on my PhD on a deconvolution problem. We were doing deconvolution in which we were constructing some specific wavelet packet bases which were designed to invert the operator, the deconvolution operator. And it looked like the technique could apply also to seismic data. So basically, what you have echographies of the underground, and these echographies are attenuated. The frequency this is basically convolved data. You want to deconvolve that in the presence of noise. So this is a typical ill-pose inverse problems. So what you see up there is a perfect reflectivity signals which was obtained from a log well, a hole in the earth. And this is actually the kind of measurements which you get, which is the reflectivity convolved with the wavelet, but the kind of convolution wavelets, which you have in seismic, some noise. And we wanted to invert that. And so we had some interesting results with our approaches, which were basically nonlinear diagonal estimators in using different kind of wavelet transforms. But it was not so much suited for their need because they wanted something to be sparser with spikes. And we were lucky because this was right at the moment where, basically, because we wanted the thing to be very, very sparse and spiky, we wanted to invert the problem with the L1 regularization norm, which is a non-quadratic form. So a couple of years ago, we would not have known how to invert that simply. And luckily, Dobeschies, De Vries, and De Mol had just released a paper on how to easily minimize this kind of L1 norm. So this came at the right time. This is exactly what they needed for their use. Okay, and we also explored we also use our knowledge in geometry to do stratigraphy, that is to detect, of course, the straits of the underground, and to use that to regularize the impedance of coefficients which you are seeing. So there was a long collaboration with these people, which turned out to be very fruitful. And there were similarities with image processing to a point, and it could have been very, very fertile for a long time if we had continued. Okay, just a word on Dave Dono yesterday was mentioning Stéphane's flexibility for moving from one world to another. It was working there too also because we were engineers, mathematicians, so you tend to be not very good at putting yourself in the shoes of a customer and understanding what he needs because you're following your own logic, your own engineering design. And Stéphane was extremely effective at putting himself in the shoes of the people we were trying to sell things to and adapt, knowing what they really needed, which was usually simpler than what we thought they needed. And that was very useful, actually. And that's not a given. I mean, when you have no business experience, it's fairly rare. Okay, so these were services, okay, all nice and well, but you do not scale with that. You cannot go very far by selling services. So the first product was codec ID. We initially started to work on the compression of photo ID because Hamid Krim was working with the North Carolina Police Department. Yes, yes. And they needed to broadcast ID pictures on their radio network, which was very low bandwidth. Okay, so this is how the problem was submitted to us initially. So okay, and so we developed a fairly effective ID compression product, which was of course designed to use all the prior information which we have on faces. So you had to detect the eyes, detect the nose, detect the different features of a face, and optimize the coding accordingly. And it was working quite well. You have an example here, which we have Erwan Le Pennec, like 2 years ago, encoded on 100 bytes and reconstructed with JPEG 2000. You can see the typical artifact and with what we were doing. So it is perfectly recognizable. And 500 bytes is the kind of things you have when you, for example, want to secure an ID paper with the 2D barcode. Okay. This is a Palm Pilot. Remember a Palm Pilot? Okay, and so you could basically, we had implemented that in real time on a Palm Pilot. This was working quite well. This was also useful for social security cards, which usually had a little, typically a kilobyte or 500 bytes spare space left to encode pictures to secure that. And actually, the product generated lots of interest very quickly because there were lots of countries which had to secure their papers, especially on social security, because there were lots of fraud. We had promising contacts in South Africa, I remember, and all this one. But unfortunately, you have no control on where the contract is really signed and when the business really takes place, because you're depending on national government contracts. So there's too little visibility. So you cannot build a business on that kind of things. But anyway, this was our first stint at products. Okay, so now we're into 5 years have passed, and we're in 2006, and HDTV is coming, and that means that we are transitioning from CRT TV, which are designed to broadcast simple definition content, PAL and NTSC, and usually interlaced, so you have semi-frames, okay? And you want to broadcast this on progressive displays, flat screen, LCD and plasmas, and this is creating a major image quality problem because these plasma and LCDs are designed for a content which does not exist yet. Okay, now of course the content which is generated now is 1080p or even more, but at the time we had very little content, so we had to convert the existing, what was broadcasted, what was on DVDs and etc. So we had to deinterlace and increase the resolution. And the most difficult part, of course, in terms of image artifact is not so much the super resolution, but the deinterlacing, which is a source of terrible artifact. So we decided to focus all our efforts on that, but what does it mean? That means that you are going to sell your technology to Samsung, to LG, to Sony, to all these companies, and you are going to sell them on an ASIC, on an electronic chip, because this has to be executed real time on their TV. So you have to turn into a fabless. You have to design electronic chips, you have to turn into a fabless. You need lots of money to do that because you're going to have to design chips, and so we had to turn to venture capital, which the process happened relatively well. So we raised actually 6 million euros to do that, which was enough for a first step, say, okay? And we went from 20 to 30 people. Originally, we were all software and mathematicians, and then suddenly we were becoming experts in electronics and semiconductors. I'll get back to what it means. Just one word on what VC financing changes to a company. Once you have VCs, you're supposed to go fast. You're supposed to spend lots of money at a rapid pace because you have told them a story in which you would explode rapidly, develop the product rapidly, and so you're no longer prudent, I would say. And once you have venture capital, you need to sell the companies in 5 to 7 years. Not exactly. You need to find a way for the investors to exit within 5 to 7 years. This is their business model. So exiting for venture capitalists means either an IPO on the stock market, which is very rare, or selling the company. So something which we didn't fully realize at this time, at least I didn't, but something which people need to be aware of is that getting venture capital into the company is an almost certain way that the company will be sold and cease to exist in 5 to 10 years. Okay? I'm mentioning that because the country which is supposed to be a model in terms of high-tech SMEs, which is Germany, has very little venture capital, and this is probably related. Okay, I'm not going to play with the videos because Vora is going to mess up the presentation. It's too late. Okay, yeah, I won't show the videos. Anyway, okay, this was wonderful. This was a really wonderful period because there were now 25 engineers of very different backgrounds, and this was really a beautiful ship. We were developing this very complex product. So you have to imagine, we were coming from mathematics, we were testing algorithm in MATLAB, and at the end of the day, they had to be implemented on electronic chips as competitive and small as possible. So it was raising a question in terms of algorithmic architecture, reducing algorithm based on the constraint of a physical support that would be implemented on. And so it was an extremely creative period. And Johan was, I think Johan had a lot of fun also during this period. He was extremely creative. He was working with Mark Shen, which was an excellent architect in electronics, and the two of them befriended and probably spent, I don't know, countless hours on designing and redesigning the algorithm at this time. And really, there was emulation, stress. The prototypes were working at the very last minute before a major trade show. The performances were spectacular. So just for these 2 years, the whole experience was worth it, because this was stressful and everything. But at least this is something which is difficult to reproduce in an academic lab. Like such a team of varied background, completely united on these goals, was a superb sight. Okay, yeah, and a couple of comments on what we did. So we had the algorithm based on mathematics. The first implementation was on what we called FPGAs, field programmable gates arrays, which are chips which are available on the shelf and which you program, which are typically parallel architecture on which you can run a first version real time, but they are relatively expensive, okay? And then you reduce the cost, and you have, and at the end of the day, you design your own chip, which you'll have to manufacture by TSMC or others, which has to be as cost-effective as possible. All right. Now, there is one thing. When we detected the problem of the HDTV on deinterlacing and conversion from simple definition to HD, we were a bit late in the sense that even if our image quality was superior to the competition, the larger electronics companies like Philips, for example, and others, were integrating that component on their system on chip, which is the central component of the electronics of a TV, which is a very cost-effective solution. So 1 year before, we would have competed with standalone chips. We were slightly late to be economically successful in this area. But there was another problem, which was even more difficult and at least as important, which was frame rate conversion. So you know that a movie is typically filmed in 24 hertz, 24 frames per second. And the TV signals is 50 or 60 hertz interlaced. While in practice, the new screens were refreshing at 50, 60 hertz progressive on plasmas, or 100 and 120 hertz on LCDs. Okay, this was a selling point to reduce the motion blur, especially for LCDs. So that when you have that, at least you need to interpolate intermediate frames. Okay, you have 24 frames, and at the end of the day, you need 100 on 120 frames. So this is extremely hard because, so basically you're thinking about motion compensation, detecting the motion and interpolating. But of course, this creates a huge number of terrible artifacts because you have occlusions, you have flashes, you have periodic patterns, so your motion is completely lost, okay? And so we developed very effective techniques compared with the competition, which were exploiting everything we could find in terms of regularity in space and time and to interpolate along this direction. So again, there are videos which I'm going to pass. Can I try a fugitive? No, because okay, the video projector is refreshing as 5 frames per second, and this is supposed to demonstrate 100 frames per second. So I'm not going to insist. Okay. Okay, so when the first chip came in, so we worked, and with the design companies, and then we got the first floor plan of the chip ready to be manufactured, and it was 3 times too large than we 3 times too large with respect to what was needed to make it cost competitive. I remember that. And so we had to again do a redesign. So this is typically, so these are the features of a chip, what you find in the chip, which you more or less segmented within the chip like that. And in practice, I think we got something which was like 55 millimeters per 55 millimeter in first version. So we had to again redesign, reinvent the whole algorithmics. And we had inherited also some of the flaws of the FPGA design. I think Mark would not like that, but because in an FPGA, you have, by nature, you have lots of small memories, and in the chip, and the overhead of the small memories in an ASIC is very strong. So we had to completely reorganize the memory to reduce that overhead and to save space. So just an anecdote, the kind of engineering problems we encountered. Okay, but eventually we ended up with a very small and very cost-effective chip. That means ready to be manufactured at about $3 per unit. We had to, you need to manufacture it at a cost which is at least half of the cost you're going to sell it. Less than that if possible. So we were able to sell it at $7, $8, and we could manufacture it at about $3. Okay, except that we were not there yet. So we are now in 2008, and we have spent all our money. And so we needed a second investment round, a very much larger one. Why is it larger? Because you have to produce the chip, okay, which is very expensive. And the second reason is that to be able to sell to the companies which I mentioned, you need to have a permanent presence in South Korea, in China, and Taiwan, in Japan, in the US, because you need to have a commercial representation and field applications. So of course, this is extremely expensive. We needed basically to raise about 15 million euros to get there, but this is 2008. Okay, so first of all, there was a general financial crisis, and within this financial crisis, consumer electronics were not doing well at all. It was even worse, okay? So we pursued a dual track approach. We continued visiting the venture capital. Some of them were apparently interested. And we also discussed with some potential acquirers, and eventually, this is what happened. We were acquired by Zoran Semiconductors, which was a large California company. They bought us basically for the frame rate conversion technology because it was hard to do, hard to reproduce. So this is where our value was. Okay, and then epilogue, the team prospered during four more years until the DTV activities were shut down as there were no longer any margin in these activities. So that's pretty much the story of Let It Wave. So as you can see, there are lots of adaptation, and it was a research problem all the way. Okay, we had to reinvent to identify that we were in a dead end and reinvent the companies at every step. Okay. Okay. Now, okay. So I was basically dead for an academic career, which is a good thing. So I was stuck with creating companies. So let me tell you about the next one I did. So then I met with Marc Lavielle, which is a statistician at École Polytechnique in INRIA, and he was working on mixed effect models. So mixed effect models are models in which you have a structural model which is typically used to describe the effect of a medication, the effect of a disease. Here, this is a model of a viral dynamics in the case of AIDS, okay? And then on top of that, you had lots of layers of variability. This is the difficult part, okay? You have to understand all the inter-individual variabilities and what makes a patient react differently than the other one, what are the covariates which are predictive, what is purely uncertainty, and etc. So this is what Marc had been doing. And this has caught the attention of the pharmaceutical industries because the difficulty of pharma companies is that their drugs tend to fail at late stages. That is, they design thousands and thousands of molecules. Most of them are abandoned immediately, but some of them go through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of clinical trials for hundreds, thousands of patients. And a large proportion at this stage fails, and at this stage it has cost 1 billion to develop the whole thing, okay? So they cannot afford to fail. So the more information they can get by modeling and simulate testing virtual doses, running in silico experiments, and designing in silico patients, the better. Okay, so that's why they were interested in these approaches. So we basically designed scientific software with statistical estimation, very intuitive plots, strong modeling capabilities for all types of disease, all types of drug regimens, and etc., so that they could test and design, try to simulate clinical trials which would be as cost-effective and informative as possible, and etc. That's what we were doing. And it worked. And it worked. The company started selling to pharmaceutical companies. So there's no story, actually. We designed software products, and they sold to pharma companies. Okay. So what I'm saying is that if I compare the two experiences, I say a startup is an exhilarating permanent research project, or in the case of Lixoft, uncertainty lasted 3 years to make sure that we had the right product, the right business model, and etc. And then at this case, it becomes an execution project. You have to be good at sales, good at developing the new versions, and it requires people with a different temper. Well, personally, I'm not a very hardworking person, and you need someone which is steadfast and disciplined, and etc. So once I had taken the company to a certain step of revenues, I was contacted I was looking for a replacement, and I was contacted by someone which had the right skills, and this was the right decision because that person took the revenues from well, 1 million euros, something like that per year, to 5 million in 3 years. And he would never have started the company by itself, yet he had the qualities, the steadfastness, which was missing. So that tells a lot on the different kind of qualities which you need at the different steps of the company. Okay? But that person would never have been happy in a startup with a strong uncertainty like Let It Wave was, for example. Okay, and I'll finish on the last project which I am doing now. I don't know the kind of company it will be, but it is very related to current data science problem. So we want to improve the care and treatments for chronic diseases. Okay, so we are targeting the complex chronic diseases like mental diseases, immunoinflammatory, Parkinson, etc., which can involve via flares, remission, and relapse. Okay, so we want to see what we can do by monitoring the patients at home with connected wearables, their smartphone and connected wearables, trying to get as much as we can from this information for a continuous long-term surveillance in their activities of daily living. Because when you observe these patients with chronic diseases, you don't learn anything on their quality of life by having them in the hospital. You need to observe really how they live, and themselves are frustrated on how they communicate their symptoms with clinicians. The communication between between patients and clinicians is suboptimal. If I take an example of mental illness, just to give you an idea of the kind of things that we can measure. So take a patient with a sort of I don't know, any kind of mental illness, this will work. You can measure physical activity or impairment with your smartphone. Okay, take just a smartphone and a watch. You can characterize physical activity or impairment of the patient. Its physiology, his social activity, his cognitive functions, and his emotions. All this can be measured with a smartphone and a sensor. Okay? So, but this is where it's becoming a difficult data science problem, is because the quality of the data is uncertain. You need to characterize it. The data is often missing, either because the patient is not wearing the device, or the acquisition of the data is not controlled at home as it would be in a hospital. So we are working with actually Stéphane Mallat, which is designing method to handle missing data in particular, for example, and you have to take advantage of all the multimodal combination of these different kind of time series, punctual measure. You have to take advantage of all this multi-source data because you are studying complex diseases with complex systems, often multipathologic. But if we do that, if we reach sufficient performance, that means we will really have a new modality to observe patients at home. And it is powerful because it is continuous, sensitivity to any change of the patient, and on long duration. Okay? And so once you have that effective modality, you have countless applications to improve the care pathway, to phenotype every patient, and to improve the treatments. Ouais, that's the end. Okay, so happy birthday, Stéphane, and thank you because I don't know if I would have had that kind of job and if we would have created all these companies without initially starting with VT12, which was Stéphane's initiative calling me in 2000. So I owe you a lot for all this.
So maybe we have time for one quick question, and probably you can get hold of Jérôme, answer. Any questions or comments?
Maybe I can make just one comment. Jérôme said it was like a research project. I think it's totally true, and one quality you need is to be totally naive. Imagine that it's going to work, it's going to be easy. We had no idea that doing electronics was different than doing MATLAB, for example. It's quite not totally realistic. And I think you need that kind of state of mind to embark and be crazy enough. So thanks very much, Jérôme, for having me.